Ladies and gentlemen, well, firstly, it's a pleasure to join you on this very special occasion as Colonel-in-Chief of the Royal Logistic Corps. And here marking, I think, truly the end of a significant milestone in the Corps' history. Very little will be the same, except, I hope, for that ethos and soul.
Prince William and Princess Anne have reportedly done the one thing many royal watchers believed would never happen. According to claims now spreading through palace circles, a decision has been made that could permanently change Camilla's place inside the monarchy. Not a disagreement, not another family dispute, not a temporary restriction hidden behind carefully chosen palace language. Sources close to the situation claim this was something far more serious. The shock began inside a private meeting that was never supposed to become public. Senior advisors were present. Legal experts had been called in, confidential records had been placed on the table, and by the time the meeting ended, those inside reportedly understood that a line had been crossed from which there would be no easy return. What Prince William read that day changed the atmosphere throughout Buckingham Palace. For months, unusual conversations had been taking place behind closed doors. Archived files were being reviewed. Historical agreements were being examined. Quiet consultations were being held with constitutional advisors.
I think it's safe to say that change is on my agenda. Change for good. And I embrace that and I enjoy that change. I don't fear it. That's the bit that excites me, is the idea of being able to bring some change. Not overly radical change, but changes that I think.
At first, nobody suspected the review would lead anywhere significant. Then a forgotten document surfaced. What it allegedly contained triggered a chain reaction reaching the highest levels of the royal family. Camilla reportedly entered the unfolding controversy, believing there was little reason for concern. After all, she remained one of the most senior figures in the monarchy and had spent years standing beside King Charles. But according to palace insiders, the issue being examined had little to do with personal relationships and everything to do with authority, royal status, and decisions that could affect the future reign of Prince William. Before we reveal the document that reportedly sent shockwaves through the palace, there is one question every royal watcher should answer. If a member of the royal family had been benefiting from an arrangement the public never fully understood, should the truth be revealed, no matter how uncomfortable it becomes? Subscribe, like, and share if you believe no one should be above scrutiny when the future of the monarchy is involved. Hi viewers, if you discovered a secret that could change the future of your family, would you expose it or keep it hidden? Write, expose it or keep it hidden in the comments. What happened next is where this story takes an extraordinary turn. Because the document Princess Anne placed before Prince William was not a recent report, a newspaper claim, or a rumor from a palace aide. It was an old royal record, one that some insiders now believe was never meant to resurface. And buried within its pages was a revelation that could explain why a confidential palace review suddenly became the biggest royal controversy in years. The palace doors had barely closed when the first whispers began spreading through the corridors of Buckingham Palace. Senior aides who had spent decades serving the crown stood frozen outside a restricted conference room, exchanging uneasy glances as officials hurried past carrying sealed folders. Something extraordinary had happened inside. Something so unexpected that even veteran staff members who had witnessed royal scandals, abdications, and family feuds were struggling to process what they had just heard. Inside that room, Prince William sat motionless, his eyes fixed on a document that few people outside the monarchy had ever known existed. Across from him sat Princess Anne, her expression unreadable. She had spent months assembling evidence, tracing old records, and comparing information hidden deep within royal archives. Now, at last, every piece was lying on the table. What had started as a routine review had become a crisis powerful enough to shake the foundations of the royal family itself. The atmosphere was unlike anything seen in recent royal memory. There were no ceremonial smiles, no carefully rehearsed statements, no effort to preserve appearances. Legal advisors had been summoned, constitutional experts had been consulted, senior officials had been instructed to remain silent until further notice. The matter before them was considered so sensitive that even trusted palace staff had been excluded from discussions.
There's always been a major ambition, and it's a huge advantage if you have somebody who can be recognised as that, and not just in your country, but around the world. You know, people don't change that much. I think they recognise those people whose commitment.
And at the centre of it all stood one name. Before the details of that explosive meeting are revealed, anyone who has spent years watching Prince William prepare to inherit the crown should subscribe, like, and share this video right now. Because if the reports coming out of the palace are true, this may be the moment many royal supporters have been waiting for. A moment when William finally refused to look the other way. Watching silently while doing nothing only helps the people who wanted these questions buried and these conversations hidden behind palace walls. If you believe Prince William has the right to protect the future monarchy he will one day lead, do not sit on the sidelines. Stand with him by subscribing, liking, and sharing before this story continues. Hi viewers, whose side are you on? Prince William or Camilla? Write William or Camilla in the comments. Camilla. What made the situation even more startling was that none of this had begun as an attack on Camilla. According to reports circulating among royal insiders, the investigation had started for an entirely different reason. Officials had been reviewing historical constitutional arrangements connected to future succession planning. It was supposed to be routine, a standard examination of records, another administrative process that would pass unnoticed by the public. Then someone found a reference that should not have been there. At first it appeared insignificant, a brief notation buried within a collection of archived correspondence. The wording was vague, the context incomplete. Yet the reference pointed toward a forgotten memorandum connected to royal titles and future reviews. It was old enough that many current palace advisors had never seen it before. Several initially dismissed it as irrelevant. Princess Anne did not.
My father's first words on entering Westminster Abbey yesterday were a pledge of service. It was a pledge to continue to serve, because for over 50 years, in every corner of the UK, across the Commonwealth, and around the world.
Unlike many around her, Anne understood the importance of seemingly minor details. Throughout her decades of royal service, she had built a reputation for noticing what others overlooked. While some advisors moved on, Anne quietly requested additional records, then more records, then entire files connected to the original reference. What she found raised troubling questions. The deeper the search went, the more unusual the pattern became. Archived notes appeared to reference discussions that had never been publicly acknowledged. Internal recommendations seemed to suggest that certain royal arrangements had been designed with future reviews in mind. Nothing directly named Camilla. Nothing explicitly predicted controversy, yet the documents repeatedly pointed toward one unsettling possibility. Some decisions that appeared permanent may never have been intended to remain untouched forever. By itself, that revelation would have been enough to spark concern. But what truly transformed concern into alarm was the discovery that several related files were missing. Not lost, missing. Entire sections of correspondence referenced supporting documents that could not immediately be located. Dates appeared without accompanying reports. Recommendations existed without attached conclusions. It was as though someone had removed crucial pieces from a puzzle while leaving enough behind to hint at the larger picture. The absence created more questions than answers. As Anne continued examining the material, she began assembling a timeline. The dates stretched back years. Certain names appeared repeatedly. Meetings had been held, consultations conducted, opinions recorded. Yet the final outcome of those discussions seemed strangely incomplete. Even experienced constitutional advisors struggled to explain why so much documentation appeared fragmented. That was when Anne made a decision that would change everything. Rather than relying on summaries prepared by others, she requested direct access to original archive records. The request surprised several palace officials. Few expected the king's sister to involve herself so personally in what still appeared to be an obscure administrative matter. But Anne insisted. Days later, the first boxes arrived. Inside were decades of correspondence, recommendations, legal observations, and confidential notes. Some had not been reviewed in years. Others had barely been touched since they were first archived. Anne examined them methodically, page by page, date by date. Days melted into sleepless nights as the candle flickered against the ancient stone walls of the archive room.
I'm not suggesting Queen Camilla lacks authority, but that tiara isn't hers. It rightfully belongs to Catherine, the Princess of Wales, for the Christmas gala at Buckingham,
Every turn of a page revealed another layer of calculated ambiguity. These were not mere administrative oversights or clerical errors born from lazy record-keeping. The deliberate erasure of names, the crossed-out margins, and the calculated gaps in the correspondence timeline pointed to a systematic campaign. Someone had meticulously sanitized these files decades ago, leaving behind only enough breadcrumbs to suggest a grand design while erasing the proof of who actually pulled the strings. Anne traced a faded ink signature from 1998, realizing with a chilling jolt that the blueprint for this crisis had been drafted long before anyone outside the inner circle had ever imagined Camilla walking down the aisle as queen, name by name. Then she found something that stopped her cold. A notation, only a few lines long, yet those few lines suggested that a significant discussion concerning title status had once taken place behind closed doors among senior royal figures. The notation referenced a memorandum that was supposed to accompany the file. The memorandum was gone, no copy, no attachment, no explanation, just an empty reference where one of the most important documents in the archive should have been. Anne immediately understood the implications. If the missing memorandum contained what the notation implied, it could alter how certain royal decisions were interpreted. It could force legal advisors to revisit assumptions that had been accepted for years. It could even trigger questions about arrangements many believed were settled permanently. For the first time, what had begun as a routine review became something far more serious. Word of the discovery eventually reached Prince William. The future king listened carefully as Anne explained what had been found. At first, he remained cautious. Royal institutions operated on records, facts, and verified information. Missing documents alone proved nothing. Speculation could easily damage reputations and create unnecessary turmoil. Yet William could not ignore one detail. The missing memorandum appeared to be connected directly to matters affecting the future structure of the monarchy. That changed everything. Within days, additional advisors were quietly brought into the process. Legal specialists began examining historical precedents. Constitutional experts reviewed old recommendations. Questions multiplied faster than answers. And then another clue surfaced, a second archive reference. This one was even more specific. Unlike the first notation, the second reference included language suggesting that future sovereigns retained authority to revisit certain arrangements under specific circumstances. The wording was incomplete. The full context remained unavailable, but it was enough to send shockwaves through those reviewing the material. Suddenly, what had seemed impossible no longer appeared impossible at all. Behind closed doors, conversations intensified. Palace officials who had initially dismissed the review now wanted updates. Advisors requested copies of reports. Senior staff began discussing potential implications should additional evidence emerge. Nobody was willing to say it openly. Not yet. But a growing number of people were beginning to ask the same question. What if the missing memorandum was real? And what if its contents were powerful enough to explain why certain records had remained buried for so long? The answer to that question was still hidden. But somewhere inside the royal archives, a forgotten file was waiting to be found. And when it finally surfaced, it would pull Prince William, Princess Anne, King Charles, and Camilla into a confrontation none of them could avoid. The heavy wooden door swung open before the knock could even echo down the corridor. Inside the dimly lit study, the safe was already wide open, its steel interior exposed to the flickering amber light of a single desk lamp. The file was gone, not misplaced, not filed away in another drawer, but physically removed from the secure vault where it had rested undisturbed for over a decade. Prince William stared at the empty metal shelf, his expression tightening into a hard, unyielding mask. Whoever had taken those papers knew the exact combination, knew the precise classification code, and worst of all, knew the devastating weight of what was written inside. Within minutes, the security logs were pulled, revealing an unauthorized access timestamp from barely 20 minutes prior. The digital trail pointed straight toward the administrative wing, bypassing standard clearance protocols through a loophole that should have been sealed years ago. Anne did not waste time asking questions. She stepped toward the desk, her fingers tracing the faint outline left by the missing binder on the dust-lined shelf. The realization hit them simultaneously. This was not a random theft by an opportunistic insider. This was a calculated preemptive strike designed to bury the evidence before the full review could be brought before the king. Legal advisors were summoned immediately, arriving at the private residence long before dawn broke over London. The atmosphere in the room shifted from quiet concern to absolute tactical urgency. Every minute spent waiting allowed whoever held the missing documents to control the narrative, to twist the timeline, and to protect themselves at the expense of the entire institution. If those pages reached the public or leaked to hostile media outlets, the resulting firestorm would consume everything the monarchy had spent generations building. The question was no longer whether a confrontation could be avoided. The question was whether they could recover the stolen file before it was too late. Before the search for the missing file intensifies and the true identity behind the security breach is exposed, ask yourself this hard truth. If someone you trusted betrayed your loyalty just to save their own reputation, would you have the courage to expose them publicly, or would you stay silent to keep the peace? If you believe corruption and hidden secrets deserve to be dragged into the light no matter the cost, smash that subscribe button right now and share this video with someone who needs to hear the truth. The digital logs led the investigation down a narrow corridor toward the private offices traditionally reserved for senior household coordination. It was a restricted zone where few dared to tread without explicit authorization. Yet, as Anne inspected the electronic access pad, the system showed something impossible. The security override had been executed using a master credential that only 3 people in the entire royal household possessed. One of them was currently out of the country. The second was King Charles, and the third was Camilla. The silence in the room grew suffocating. William did not blink, his jaw set as he processed the implications of the digital footprint. If the person at the center of the controversy had actively broken protocol to secure the missing papers, it meant they already knew the severity of what was coming. It meant they realized the review was no longer a theoretical exercise or a procedural dispute. It was a direct challenge to their position, backed by physical proof that could not be easily dismissed or ignored. Days stretched into agonizing weeks as the internal investigation expanded beyond the immediate circle of advisors, pulling in retired household secretaries and former archivist clerks who thought their days of service were long behind them. Every interview revealed another fractured piece of the puzzle, pointing toward a systemic effort to manage public perception at the expense of strict constitutional accuracy. The more witnesses Anne spoke with, the clearer it became that the silence surrounding these protocols was not accidental. It was engineered to protect a fragile status quo until the exact moment a future sovereign chose to tear the veil away. The digital forensics team worked in frantic silence, decoding the encrypted metadata left behind on the palace server. The breach had not been a crude cyber attack or an external hack. It was an inside execution using administrative bypass keys that had not been active since the late 90s. Every keystroke recorded on the terminal proved that whoever accessed the vault understood the internal filing system better than the head archivist himself. The tension within the private family quarters reached a boiling point when royal protection officers logged an unrecorded vehicle entering the restricted royal perimeter late at night. There was no official visitor pass logged in the digital registry, and the vehicle bypassed the main security gate through an old service entrance that hadn't been utilized since the previous decade. Security footage later showed a lone figure carrying a heavy leather briefcase directly toward the private administrative suites. When the morning patrols checked the area, a series of encrypted computer terminals had been wiped clean of their recent access history, confirming that someone inside the inner circle was desperately trying to cover their tracks before the impending reckoning. Constitutional experts pored over the recovered historical addendums with a growing sense of disbelief. The language embedded within the marginalia explicitly outlined a worst-case contingency protocol, drafted decades prior to safeguard the institution against public disillusionment or challenges to royal legitimacy. It wasn't just a collection of theoretical opinions or advisory memos, it was a legally binding framework designed to be triggered exclusively during moments of severe institutional friction. The realization that this contingency had been quietly catalogued and forgotten for generations struck the legal team with chilling clarity. The mechanisms for sweeping structural change were not invented overnight. They had been waiting silently in the shadows for the right moment to be weaponized. They knew precisely which cabinet held the duplicate drafts, which folders contained the unredacted legal opinions, and which logs were routinely bypassed during late-night security sweeps. It was a ghost walk through the most secure corridors of the monarchy, executed with surgical precision to ensure no alarm bells would ring until the drawers were already empty. Minutes later, a low knock interrupted the tension. One of the senior archivists rushed into the room, clutching a single, sealed envelope that had been slid underneath the private side entrance. There was no return address, no official stamp, just a handwritten note scrawled across heavy parchment paper bearing a signature that instantly drained the color from the face of every legal advisor in the room. The missing file had not been destroyed. It had been delivered directly into the hands of the opposition. The heavy oak doors of the private stateroom slammed shut with a deafening thud that rattled the crystal chandelier overhead. There were no pleasantries, no polite nods, and no welcoming gestures as Prince William and Princess Anne took their seats at the head of the long mahogany table. Surrounding them were hand-picked constitutional experts, top-tier legal counsel, and senior household officials who looked as though they were attending a tribunal rather than a family gathering. Every phone had been collected at the entrance, locked away in a soundproof security box to prevent any leaks from reaching the outside world. The tension in the air was so dense it felt physical, suffocating every person in the room as they waited for the doors to click open one final time. Camilla entered with measured steps, her posture rigid, her expression projecting absolute composure as she assumed her place opposite William. She clearly believed this emergency summons was nothing more than an administrative overreaction, a temporary storm kicked up by overly cautious advisors who misunderstood the nature of her position. But that facade vanished the exact second Princess Anne reached into her leather briefcase and dropped the recovered archive files onto the center of the table. One dossier after another slid across the polished wood, landing with heavy thuds that shattered any remaining illusion of safety. Anne did not raise her voice, yet her words cut through the suffocating silence like a razor blade. Every document told a damning story of systematic concealment, unverified title elevations, and legal maneuvers executed behind closed doors to bypass the traditional oversight of the Crown. Legal counsel immediately stepped forward to lay out the raw, unvarnished reality for everyone present. The issue was no longer about hurt feelings or private family friction. It struck directly at the constitutional integrity of the entire institution, threatening public trust and casting a dark shadow over the future succession of the throne. If these records were exposed without a proactive resolution from within, the resulting public backlash would destroy decades of carefully cultivated goodwill. Camilla attempted to push back, her voice tightening as she argued that the historical agreements were grandfathered in by royal prerogative and immune to retroactive scrutiny. The air grew colder as the legal counsel opened a secondary leather portfolio, presenting a typed transcript from an unrecorded Privy Council session dating back more than 20 years. The words printed on those brittle pages dismantled Camilla's defense piece by piece. There was no ambiguity left to hide behind, no loop of royal prerogative broad enough to absorb the blow. The transcript laid bare a prior warning delivered by constitutional scholars to the highest levels of the household, explicitly stating that any elevation of status achieved without full parliamentary disclosure would remain legally vulnerable to future sovereign revocation. Camilla's breath hitched as she realized the trap had not been built yesterday. It had been waiting for her arrival since the very first day she entered the royal fold. William remained utterly silent, his eyes locked on her face, refusing to offer even a flicker of emotional comfort or support. Before the final legal verdict that seals Camilla's fate is revealed, pause for a moment and ask yourself a painful question. If you knew someone was protecting their own status at the absolute expense of honesty and integrity, would you still look the other way just to keep up appearances? If you believe that nobody, no matter how powerful or elite, should ever be above accountability, smash that subscribe button right now and share this video with everyone you know. Anne leaned forward, placing the final piece of evidence directly over the disputed seals on the documents. It was an independent legal consensus compiled by the highest constitutional authorities in the land, and its conclusion was absolute and undeniable. The legal opinion definitively stated that the title in question was never permanently secured and could be formally reviewed, altered, or stripped entirely by royal decree under specific conditions of institutional crisis. The breath left the room in a collective rush. Nobody expected the conclusion to be so sweeping, so legally sound, and so devastatingly final. Camilla stared at the papers in disbelief, her composure finally cracking under the weight of the undeniable proof. The realization settled over the room like a physical heavy blanket. This was not a temporary hurdle or a dispute that could be quietly swept back under the rug with a polite press release. The mechanism for reversal was sitting right there in black and white, verified by experts who left zero room for loopholes or escape routes. King Charles was no longer shielded by ambiguity or time. Every person at that table understood that the path forward demanded an impossible choice between protecting an individual or safeguarding the survival of the British monarchy for generations to come. The pen trembled slightly against the heavy parchment as King Charles stared down at the execution order sitting before him on the mahogany desk. There was no escape left, no corridor of plausible deniability to walk down, and no advisor left willing to offer a comforting falsehood. Every option had been exhausted during hours of brutal, closed-door deliberations that had driven a permanent wedge through the heart of the royal household. Outside those locked doors, the world moved on completely unaware that the monarchy was standing at the absolute edge of an unprecedented constitutional precipice. The burden of the entire institution rested entirely on a single stroke of ink, forcing a father and a sovereign to weigh personal devotion against the survival of the crown itself. Prince William stood rigidly by the tall Palladian window, his gaze fixed on the courtyard below, his position unwavering. The future of the monarchy could not be compromised by sentimentality or fear of public scandal. Princess Anne sat opposite the king, her hands folded neatly in her lap, embodying the cold, unyielding reality that the ancient rules of the institution applied to every single person without exception. Camilla stood near the fireplace, her voice carrying a sharp edge of desperation as she argued that the entire process was a rigged betrayal, a coordinated ambush designed to strip away her standing through technicalities and manufactured panic. Charles looked from one face to the next, trapped inside a nightmare of his own making where every possible path led to devastating collateral damage. The ticking of the grandfather clock seemed to amplify, measuring out the dying seconds of an era defined by compromise and quiet appeasement. Outside, the rain lashed against the heavy leaded windows of the private study, washing away the illusion that the family could forever outrun its own history. Charles closed his eyes, flashes of decades past colliding with the cold, unforgiving demands of the present. To protect his wife meant sacrificing the crown's remaining credibility in the eyes of a public already losing faith in institutional transparency. To protect the crown meant wielding the executioner's axe against his own household. The throne demanded a sacrifice, and there were no more hiding places left in the palace. Before the final recommendation is formally accepted and the irreversible decision alters the course of royal history, consider this uncomfortable truth. How often do you sit back and watch powerful individuals protect their own privileges while ordinary people suffer the consequences of their silence? If you believe that true justice demands accountability, no matter who sits on the throne, smash that subscribe button right now and share this video with everyone you know. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating, broken only by the ticking grandfather clock in the corner of the grand study. Nobody spoke. Nobody offered a word of reassurance or advice. The weight of the moment pressed down on the king with crushing force as he realized that refusing to act would cause a catastrophic public collapse of trust in the crown. To protect the monarchy, he had to sacrifice the stability of his own marriage and authorize the formal restructuring of the royal titles. With a slow, deliberate motion, Charles pulled the document closer, positioned the nib of the pen against the paper, and signed his name, sealing an outcome that would soon shock the entire world. The flashbulbs erupted like lightning across the damp gravel courtyard as Prince William and Princess Anne stepped out side by side into the pale morning light. There were no diplomatic smiles, no softening of their expressions, and no attempts to mask the grim reality of the moment before the global press corps. The joint appearance was an intentional, devastating display of unified royal authority that sent immediate shockwaves through the gathered media pack. Senior palace officials stood rigidly in the background, their phones buzzing incessantly as the formal confirmation of the title revocation began flashing across news terminals worldwide. The institutional machinery had finally spoken, reducing months of silent palace power struggles to a single, irreversible public statement that altered the landscape of the British monarchy forever. Before the final archival secret is dragged into the open light and the shocking implications of what was truly hidden are fully understood, ask yourself this brutal truth. How many times will you allow elite institutions to keep you completely in the dark while they secretly rewrite the rules behind closed doors just to save themselves? If you believe that true accountability matters more than royal comfort, smash that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment telling us whether you stand with William or Camilla, and share this video with everyone you know before it gets taken down. As the dust settled inside the palace, Princess Anne quietly unlocked a rusted steel security box that had remained untouched in the deepest recesses of the basement archives for decades. Inside lay one final yellowed document that had somehow escaped the initial purge. It contained a handwritten note scrawled by a senior royal figure years ago, proving that the entire controversy had never been a recent disagreement at all. It had been an open secret, deliberately buried by the establishment, long before Charles ever took the throne. The story does not end here because the very next file recovered from that archive contains something even more terrifying: a direct financial audit linking the missing title protocols to foreign accounts that have never been investigated by Parliament. If you miss our next exclusive documentary exposing where those funds actually went, you will never know the real reason why this entire royal cover-up was orchestrated in the first place. Make sure you are subscribed with notifications turned on, because what we are about to reveal next will shatter everything you thought you knew about the crown.